instructions. Back. All right, so this morning.
Everybody quiet, get up!
This morning we have a wonderful presentation for you. So I'd like to ask for your cooperation and your help in welcoming our Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Antonio Santana. So before I turn the mic over to him and we get started, I just want to thank two people who had a big hand in getting this together today and all of the Hispanic Heritage Month activities that we have planned. So I would like you to please give a nice round of applause to Mrs. Wendy Palladino and Mrs. Colleen O'Troish. Thank you, both of you, for all your work on this. And without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Santana.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa. Good morning, what's up? Oh man, so before I begin, just a big shout out to the building administration, your E&L departments for inviting me here tonight. I also want to give a special acknowledgement to one of our board of trustees, our vice president, Ms. Ann Hayes, who's here. So a round of applause for her, for everything she does, volunteering her time for the school district. So, I know it's early, it's Friday morning, but I'm super excited to be here because one of the things that made me nervous about being a superintendent of schools is not having so much contact with students. And all my career, I worked in school buildings, and I just love the interactions, especially with high school students. I was a high school principal for 7 years. I loved every minute of it. So thank you guys for welcoming me here this morning. I know you guys are going to be a fantastic audience, and we're going to try to have a little bit of fun this morning. This morning for me represents a lot of mixed emotions. Growing up, when I was your age in high school, I can say this publicly, but I wasn't always so proud of my heritage. This is how I'm going to begin. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. So I feel like really honored. I think about my mother in my mind and how proud she'd be that I'm here talking to an auditorium full of great people about my heritage, what makes me proud, and to give you a little bit of historical perspective on it. So before we begin, I want to start with a couple of definitions, because we have to. Because what does it really mean to be Hispanic, or Latino, or Latinx? And that's been a huge debate, and we all identify as different things. Some of us identify with our nationalities. For example, I'll say I'm El Salvadorian, or Honduran, I'm Italian, I'm German, or there are bigger, broader categories. But really the difference between being Latino or Hispanic is really interesting, and I never identified as a Latino until I got to college, and I'll explain that a little bit as I go on. But one of the things I want to emphasize that these categories, Hispanic or Latino, are so broad and represent so many different types of people that it's hard to just categorize people under these like big labels. But just to get into a little bit, the difference between Hispanic refers to people who come from Spanish-speaking countries, whereas Latino is more geographical. It's people from Latin America, including Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. So that focuses on geography, and to be considered Latino or Latinx, and the Latinx came about because, as you know, anybody who studied Spanish, there's gender associated with language. So Latino is a masculine word, or Latina. Latinx is supposed to embody everybody. But this is interesting because this is a little Venn diagram we use in class, but being Latino includes people from like Guyana, Brazil, which are located in South America, who don't necessarily speak Spanish, but are considered part of this larger group. And again, Hispanic refers to all the Spanish-speaking countries in the world, including Spain. And when I was a kid, we were just called Spanish. Oh, those are the Spanish kids. Even though none of us theoretically were from Spain, that's what they refer to us as. But I'm going to go a little bit back into the history about how Latinos were identified in society and how societal norms sort of shape our identities, because we can't escape media and their portrayals of people. from the beginning of media, there's always been stereotypical characters that have been presented to American society. This one is Super Velez, Mexican Spitfire. Another one you guys are all going to recognize, Scarface. This movie poster is from the Perez family. And one of those things that, besides these movies perhaps being entertaining, Scarface is considered this classic gangster movie in America. These characters weren't necessarily played by Latino actors, but also they represented like a small percentage of what the actual population was. Scarface, for example, was based upon the Mariela boat lift. That's when a lot of Cubans came over from Cuba to escape communism. And in that movie, they depicted all these immigrants from Cuba as basically criminals and people who were going to be up to no good. And these stereotypes are even sometimes found in products. This is a Coffee Mate product that says, who's better than a hot new Latin to love, right? So again, speaking to stereotypes and trying to define a group of people in a manner that sort of fits certain opinions. When you look at Latino stereotypes in the media, their depictions in media, 36% of Latino roles represent criminals, 31% gardeners, and 31% maids. So those are basically the roles that were used to portray Latinos or Hispanics historically. And you can even argue that there's only like 5 Latino stereotypes in Hollywood. The gangster, the angry Latina, who's questionable. I'm not going to say what that is. And the land lover here, and the maid, which are kind of funny and entertaining. But for me growing up in the city, it sort of made me feel sort of bad about my heritage, because these are all the images that I kind of related to when I looked up at the TV screen and in Hollywood. So I want to talk a little bit about myself, growing up as a Latino kid in New York City, and how my heritage sort of impacted me. I've shared this with staff, but I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I consider myself a city rat. I grew up in a housing project. In New York City, housing projects are public housing. They have terrible reputations, but there are a lot of families and decent people who live there, of course. And I was raised by my mother, who was an immigrant, who always felt sort of out of place in New York and in the United States. She alone, because my father wasn't in the picture, raised 3 boys in the projects, and her main message to us was survival, making good choices, and sort of breaking those stereotypes, because she knew that we would be treated differently. And she always watched over us, and I love sharing this picture because this is a picture of my building, and you can't see this, but my mother is there in that window. And since I was a little kid, and I went out onto the streets, do whatever I did, until this day, as a 50-year-old man, my mom still washes out of that window and waves to me and makes sure I'm okay. So she looked after the neighborhood, and part of looking after the neighborhood was instilling in me this whole notion that I was different, that if I had to be just as good, I had to work twice as hard, that I would be judged differently because of our heritage and our standing. And people even stereotype me when I tell them I'm from the projects, because they're like, oh man, Tony Santana, you grew up in the projects? Were you hard? Did you have a pit bull? Were you tough? And I'm like, nah man, I had a bunny rabbit. I walked around my neighborhood with a bunny rabbit because I figured no one's going to mess with the kid with the bunny rabbit, right? I wasn't tough, I was a funny kid, but that's a real picture of me behind my project back in the 1980s, hanging out with my rabbit. And so, knowing this in the back of my mind, having this appreciation of my heritage, my mom instilled certain values in me: sacrifice and hard work, humility and openness, ownership and accountability, dissatisfaction with the status quo. Obviously, sacrifice and hard work. We were poor. She was an immigrant. She wanted better for me, and she knew that if I worked hard, if I dedicated myself in public schools, I'd have a better life growing up. Humility and openness. She said there's a lot of great resources in New York City that you can take advantage of. Be open-minded. Meet different people. See what opportunities they give you. Be a decent person. Ownership and accountability. My mom didn't want to hear excuses. If something went wrong, it was my fault, and I had to own it. And that's how you kind of grow. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. Sometimes life presents challenges. It's about how you meet those challenges and forge ahead that's important. And dissatisfaction with the status quo means that you shouldn't be satisfied with things that you're unhappy with. And she said, you deserve more than living in the projects. You should have a life where you have opportunity, and certainly your kids should have a better life than you did growing up. And so I followed all this guidance, and I applied and was accepted to Cornell University, which for a kid from the projects was a big monumental deal. I wanted to go to Cornell to be a veterinarian. I wanted to work with animals. Here I am as a superintendent of school, so that didn't work out because when I got to college, I did some weird things with animals, and I was like, not for me. Not to diminish all the good doctors out there that service our pets, farm animals, and wildlife. But for the first time at Cornell University was when I started appreciating my Latino-ness, my Hispanicness. Because when I got up there, I met a group of guys, and they were from the city, and that was me as a college freshman. I had a lot of hair. But when I got up there, I met guys who were members of this fraternity, Lambda Upsilon Lambda, the La Unidad Latina. And what was remarkable to me is, being at Cornell, I felt kind of out of place, being from the projects from the city, being a Hispanic kid. There wasn't that many of us on campus. And I met these group of guys that all had similar backgrounds. But not just that, they were all super proud of their heritage. They wore it on their sleeves. They're like, yeah, I'm a Latino man, because we're all guys in a fraternity. And that was new to me. And so I decided to pledge the fraternity, which meant I had to do a lot of things, including shave my head. That was me. We were called caballeros, which means gentlemen when we were pledging. And I pledged for 9 weeks. That pledge involved, you ready for this? 6 nights a week, 6 hours mandatory library hours, because we wanted our fraternity brothers to be successful in school. A lot of historical stuff we did, research about our countries and our fraternity brothers' countries, because we represented a lot of countries in my frat. We had Mexican guys, Puerto Rican guys, Dominican guys, guys from Honduras, all over the place. And we were all uniquely different. And our experiences were uniquely different, but we had that commonality. So I pledged, and I became a brother of this fraternity, which was fantastic because aside from promoting good things, and I am still an active member of my fraternity, we do a lot of community service. We created a network of Latino and Hispanic men that to this day keep in touch. And here's a more recent picture. That's me with a big beard. But included in this picture are all guys who grew up in the projects. We're all Hispanic, who didn't have resources growing up. But this here is Eric Gonzalez. He's currently the Brooklyn District Attorney. It's the 3rd largest police jurisdiction in the country, and he's in charge of that. My friend here, Dean, is a doctor. This guy, he was a lawyer for Martha Stewart. My friend Angel here is a big executive at Sony. He's been traveling the world. And we all found success because we worked hard and we didn't compromise our identities as Latinos, and we supported each other. And that was really the first time I started feeling really good about being Latino and losing that shame that I had as a young individual. Hispanic Heritage Month, I don't expect you to read this, started in the 1960s in California by Mexican Americans who wanted to celebrate their long history in this country. And they were afforded a week to celebrate Hispanic heritage. And this happened in 1968 when Congress authorized the president to issue an annual proclamation designated Hispanic Heritage Week. 2 decades later, 20 years later, this was expanded to a month-long celebration in the 80s by then President Ronald Reagan. And the reason it's celebrated September 15th to October 15th, which is weird because it's in the middle of 2 months, is because a lot of countries in Latin America celebrate their independence during that time. Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. And also now to Mexico and Chile, who celebrate their independence on September 16th and 18th, respectively. But to give you more of an overview of Hispanic Heritage Month, these are the 2 years it was established based on these dates of independence. But what's remarkable about it is how much of our American culture is entrenched in Latino culture. One statistic that I think is pretty amazing is that Spanish was spoken in what's considered the United States, places like Nevada, California, New Mexico, Texas. Spanish was spoken in those places 100 years before English was spoken in this country. People kind of lose that historical perspective that the Spanish language and people who we deem Hispanic or Latino have been here for a really long time before the country was actually forged. And again, a lot of these territories, this is why it's important to know history, were sort of forged after the Mexican-American War, 1848. But yeah, it's just amazing. Right now, Hispanics or Latinos are the largest minority group in the United States. Our population continues to grow. And some fun facts in terms of how Latino or Hispanic culture has immersed itself in American culture is, for example, tortillas, which we use to make tacos and burritos, outsell hamburger and hot dog buns in this country. Tacos have become a part of the American culture, even though it has its origins in Latin America. Of course, we can't go to a party without escaping Latino music, reggaeton, which is really popular now. People like Daddy Yankee, which I happen to love. And so some of our American holidays, like Cinco de Mayo, are actually based on events that happen in Latin America. Cinco de Mayo, for example, was based on the date when the Mexicans won victory over the French. A lot of people think it's like Mexican independence, but Cinco de Mayo is really an American holiday that's kind of drawing upon Latino culture. And the point of this is that the Latino legacy is America's heritage. You can't escape the two. When you go to places all throughout the country, think about how many states are named after Spanish names. Nevada means like a snowy place. Florida is really Florida. California. Texas, which actually comes from the Aztec language. Every time you see those X's in Spanish. But yeah, again, a lot of great sort of facts. There was soldiers who fought for the U.S. independence were of Hispanic descent back in those days. In the 1960s, Latinos really developed our ranching sort of technology and sort of customs. And it's just unbelievable the impact that we've had on American culture, and it's something we should all be proud of and we should celebrate. In addition, there are a lot of important people that contributed not just to this country, but worldwide, that come from Hispanic heritage and Latino heritage, and here's just a few. Of course, this person, because I'm old, is Cantinflas. Anybody know who Cantinflas is? All right, a couple people. That's really old school. He was kind of like in every Mexican comedy movie when I was a kid, and he was super funny, and we loved him. There's some more contemporary people. Frida Kahlo, super famous. Luis Lin Miranda, obviously famous for his theatrical productions. Then one person that people didn't realize was Latino was Oscar de la Renta. Oscar de la Renta, the famous fashion designer who happened to be Dominican. But he has the name Oscar de la Renta. Having said that, in the early days of Hollywood, certain Hollywood celebrities actually changed their names to mask the fact that they had Latino heritage. One of the most famous examples of this is Martin Sheen and his son Charlie Sheen. Have you guys heard of those actors? Kind of old school. Martin Sheen's actual name is Ramon Estevez. Charlie Sheen is Carlos Estevez. And their brother, who's also an actor, kept his Spanish name, Emilio Estevez. So this is how far we've come from the point where people had to hide their identity or feel shame for it, to the point we celebrate it and wear it in our sleeves. So I think that's pretty fantastic, and there's certainly a lot of people that we can draw upon in terms of looking for guidance and inspiration. But being Hispanic and being Latino is really complex. And like I said at the beginning, we shouldn't categorize people with these like broad brushstrokes. So my heritage, first and foremost, I'm a proud American. My mom was an immigrant. I was born here. And I'm proud of that fact because she came to this country looking for opportunities for us, and those things sort of manifested themselves. My brother's a photographer. He's doing really well. And my other brother is an Army veteran who's doing well and living in Florida. So we all came out of poverty because America has a structure and a framework for you to lift yourself up. On my father's side, he is Dominican. He's from the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, which I love, which I've visited many, many times. Great islands, great food, great music, great culture. My mother is from Uruguay. When I was a kid, I used to be embarrassed to say my mother was from Uruguay because nobody knew what Uruguay was. People thought it was a funny, like, you're a what? I'm like, Uruguay. I'm a Guay. No, Uruguay, the country. But fantastic country. It's been independent for a long time. It's all the way in the southern end of South America, right next to Argentina. Has its own culture, big cowboy culture, a lot of great cuisine. And then, when you look at all my nieces and nephews, my brother's kids, you can't see this, we're kind of like all of the above. My oldest nephew, Zeke, and my two nephews here, Simone and Luis, they're half African American. I have my little nephew Renee, that's Luca, they're half Taiwanese. I got Chloe and little Xavier, and my nephew Sonny, half Korean. And my own kids, their mom happens to be Jewish and Italian. So what is their heritage, right? Think about all the mixed bag of people that I have, and we're all Santanas, and we're all cousins. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot more to our story than we suspect. I had my DNA analyzed, and it turned out that, sure, there's some things that didn't surprise me. 28% of my genetic code comes from Portugal, right? When you think about the Portuguese coming into the Americas back in those exploration days, makes sense. Spain, 24%. And then I saw Scotland, 13%. Indigenous South America, which is people from South America, indigenous blood, 5%. So that must come from my mother from Uruguay. France, 5%. And then the rest, Cameroon, Senegal, Berlin, those are all African nations. So if you put all the African nations together, I'm like 15% African too. And I really found this really interesting because these are all the countries represented in my genetic code in terms of my origin. And that got me really curious because the questions I started asking is, what is the historical context to my existence? The fact that I'm here today had to be kind of the result of all these different things that happened throughout history. People traveling from places like Africa and Europe, indigenous people. I found that really intriguing. And another question I asked myself, am I influenced in any way by my ancestors or my genetic makeup? How much of who I am as a person is kind of because of those things? Some people, I'll get a little sciencey with you guys, because I was a science teacher. Some people believe in genetic memory, that somehow our genetic code holds memories from our ancestors. So when you have certain reactions to certain things, or certain gut feelings, it's based upon some ancestral experience they had that helped them survive. It's crazy thinking, but it kind of makes sense. And then I also think about what elements of my personality have been taken from all these people that have been a part of my heritage. So what I did, and this is pretty amazing, this is real, through my genetic little app, I inputted my mother's name and birth date, my father's name and birth date, and it started populating a family tree based on historical records. And what was really cool is through my paternal grandmother, that's my father's mother, Aurora Bonet, as a French name, her ancestors came, her parents came from an island, she lived in the Dominican Republic. Her parents came from an island called Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. And I went all the way back over here to the 1700s, to France. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, never in a million years did I think my family tree would look like this. And that's what makes this all so amazing. And so I'm going to get a little math question for you. Considering my family tree, what is the real probability of everything occurring, people meeting and traveling, and all the things that needed to happen so that I exist? Think about these two people getting married and meeting each other, traveling from Europe to the Caribbean, to an island in Guadeloupe, traveling from Guadeloupe to the Dominican Republic, and that's just on my grandmother's side. What about my African heritage on my grandfather's side? And I know it comes from my grandfather on my father's side. How many people got together, made decisions to travel to the Americas? How many people made the decision to meet people who are different from each other? Because when you look at my heritage, it's such a mixed bag of people. All these things were really intriguing to me. So, the answer And it's a not so math answer, is the probability of my existence is pretty much impossible. When you think about everything that needed to happen for me to be here this morning, for me to exist, for me to look the way I look, to have all these experiences, it's pretty remarkable to think that I actually exist. And that's what my message is to all of you this morning. I know we're here to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, but I think everybody should really start thinking about their own heritage and their own stories, because we are in fact all special. We really are. We are mathematical impossibilities when you think about it. And you should feel fortunate and lucky and take advantage of that luck and fortune to make good choices, to work hard, and to achieve that success that you want to achieve, however you define that success. And it's going to be different for everybody. In my last school, I asked my students to create slides from their backgrounds, and when students started researching their backgrounds, they were shocked to find out how interesting their stories were. Whether you have German background, Irish, Italian, we have India represented here, Honduras, Africa. Everybody loved the fact that they got to kind of like celebrate their heritage, and I wanted to make that challenge here to everybody, to really like celebrate not just your own heritage, but enjoy our diversity. We are very lucky that we go to school here in South Country because there is a lot of diversity. You get to meet a lot of different types of people, we coexist, and everybody who's different enriches your lives. All of my friends who are not labeled or identified as Hispanic have made my life better and more valuable because they've taught me different things that help me appreciate who I am and my heritage. So that's my message to you. Be proud of whatever your heritage is, regardless of where you're from. Be proud of your Latino heritage, if you're a Latino student or a Hispanic student. Celebrate our diversity, and just have a clip of pride. And that's how I'm going to end it, guys. So I hope you enjoyed my little talk. We still have a couple of minutes. One thing I'm trying to accomplish here, I'm going to go in the corner to do it, is a selfie with the superintendent. So I'm going to try to capture this whole auditorium. That's what I do. All right. Put your hands up, smile. Alright guys, awesome. Does anybody have any questions in like 2 or 3 minutes? Yes, question. The question was it true that I was in The Sopranos? The answer is yes. So part of my history and my career, I did acting and comedy for a while. I was in The Sopranos. I was also in The Guiding Light soap opera. And guess what I played? Immigrant number 4. Yes, that's where I played in. But yeah, I was in The Sopranos, 5 episodes. Question over here. Alright guys, no more questions. And finally I have to say this in Spanish. Para todos los estudiantes que hablan español, tengan mucho orgullo en su herencia. Si son de El Salvador, Ecuador, Honduras. Sí, pregunta. Where am I from? I'm from New York City, half Dominican, half Uruguayan. Uruguay, República Dominicana. All right.